Welcome to the second session of the FCLP's webinar on sovereign financial instruments for forests and sustainable development. My name is Charlie Speller. I'm the interim co-director for the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership. And I've got the pleasure of hosting today's session where we have a number of brilliant guests and speakers to go into more detail on this topic. For those of you who couldn't join our first session last week, we were accompanied by Paul Steele from IED and Jill Dorchy from Potomac. They both presented a general overview of what type of financial instruments are available for sovereigns and details on the financial reporting and economic structures that these have. The recording for that session and this session will both be made available online after today, and details of how to access those will follow soon. The purpose of today's session is to explore case studies from Belize, Ecuador, Brazil, and we'll also have a presentation from the World Bank. And these presentations will showcase how countries and organizations are leveraging debt instruments to address environmental challenges and promote sustainable economic growth. A couple of reminders on logistics. Interpretation is available. There should be a button on the bottom of your screen, and instructions have been added on the chat for how to access that. Please also note the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to ask questions or raise your hand if you prefer when we open the floor for discussions. I hope everyone enjoys today's session, and we should be able to now get started. But I do note that Aaron, you have a hand raised. I don't know if we can bring Aaron in before we get going. Or maybe that's been resolved. But yeah, please do raise your hand if anything needs to be resolved throughout the session. Silvana, yeah, I can see that you're sharing your screen. Great. Okay. Our first panel today will focus on debt conversion refinancing and bilateral debt swaps. We'll hear from experts on Belize's case study, Ecuador's debt conversion for marine conservation, and the Nature Conservancy's work on greening sovereign debt. Our speakers today include, firstly, Beverly Wade, the Director of the Blue Bond and Finance Permanence Unit at Belize's Office of the Prime Minister, who will share insights into the country's experience with mixed type DFNS and credit enhancement. We also have Monica Chavez Lemos, Director of the Intersectoral Policies from the Finance Ministry of Ecuador, who will discuss the largest debt for nature conversion completed in the world. Finally, have Kevin Bender from the Nature Conservancy, who will provide an overview of the Nature Bonds Toolkit and its potential applications. I would invite all three of you, Beverly, Monica, and Kevin, to open your cameras if at all possible. Following their presentations, we'll open the floor for a Q&A session. So I will turn to Beverly first. So Beverly, I can't quite see you yet, but hopefully you're there. Thank you for joining us today. I don't know if you're going to...
Are you seeing me? Are you hearing me?
Great. I can see you, Beverly. Brilliant.
Okay.
I don't know if you'll be using supporting slides today.
No, the orientation said it was more of a discussion type presentation.
Perfect. Well, I'm happy to tee you up if that helps.
Okay.
Yeah, we hoped that today that you could give us a bit of an insight into, given that Belize has such a strong focus on the blue economy, and how it came about that Belize decided to establish a debt for nature swap to align with your existing environmental policies and goals, and whether and how you engaged across ministries in the planning of that swap. And so the more you could tell us about the process that accompanied this deal from the government's perspective, the better, I think.
Yeah.
So over to you, Beverly.
Sure. Well, thank you again, and for giving us the opportunity to share our experience. And also, I know that our colleague from TNC is also on this panel, Kevin, who will also be able to pitch in on some of the details as it relates to the specifics of the actual negotiations and the deals. But in 2020, we had a change of administration. Belize was coming out of the crisis of the COVID pandemic. We had a retraction in our economy of 16%. We were heavily indebted with an unsustainable debt per GDP ratio. I believe at that time it was over 130%. And so there was a priority that was set by the new administration that came in, that we had to look at our debt, period. It was something that had to be addressed. And it was also a part of the National Fiscal Recovery Plan also. And so at the same time, Belize had a long history of, I would say, good environmental stewardship. And for the first time in 2020, we had established a Ministry of the Blue Economy, where the government of the day decided that it was time to rightfully seat the blue economy in terms of national development, and to look at all the great things that we have been doing across the blue economies. It wasn't that we didn't have a presence in terms of a blue economy, but it was now to structure it and to consolidate it properly so that we could now approach it from a more structured perspective, and to now make interventions to allow it to play its rightful role as one of the pillars for national economic development. And so in we started discussions with the Nature Conservancy, and I could see Kevin now. Hi, Kevin, good morning. And the Nature Conservancy has been a partner in Belize for a very long time, some 30 years, I believe, before that. And they, at the same time, were in discussions with looking at a possible big deal for Belize. There were some discussions before, but the discussions weren't advanced yet. And so I would say timing was one of the key factors. As I said, we were in an economic situation that we needed to address urgently, one. Secondly, government was already now looking at approaching our largest external commercial debt in terms of looking at how it would approach it, and looking at negotiations with the bondholders at the time. We had kicked the can down the road for that debt twice before, and we were already now looking at possible defaulting again. And so we were then looking at how we could now engage these bondholders to look at a way forward with that debt. And so, but at the same time, as I said, there were exciting things happening in the blue economy and in marine conservation in Belize. Belize had set national goals in terms of its conservation targets. It also had national goals in terms of now the development of a responsible blue economy. And so there was an opportunity here to leverage the country's commitment to a responsible blue economy and to conservation, and to leverage that to now raise finances through a blue bond to now address debt, but also that would have allowed us to invest in our blue space, in marine conservation, and in the blue economy. So that there were some key things that I think are important that were very central to the deal, and Kevin can go into them a little bit more. But one of the key things was that we had a strategic partner, and that strategic partner for us was TNC. Because these debts, we speak about them a lot, but they're fairly complex. They're not necessarily simple. There are details and specific considerations depending on the countries. And for us in Belize, we were in a situation where this foreign commercial debt that we had, our bonds were really trading as junk bonds. And for us to realistically close a high quality deal, one of the key features that we worked on with TNC was to bring in another strategic partner, that was a Development Finance Corporation, who provided for us the credit enhancements that were needed. They de-risked the deal, and that allowed us really to now have high quality bonds for the market. And along with TNC, we identified our private sector partner, which is Credit Suisse, who was able to now bring on board the private sector investments. And we were very happy because our bonds were oversubscribed, really. And a lot of that had to do with the credit enhancement and the structure of the deal itself from a financial perspective. As I mentioned, the negotiations with the bondholders allowed Belize to negotiate a haircut on the existing loan that had existed then. And we made substantial savings from the deal, which allowed us to have the kind of fiscal space, because at the time, before the deal was successfully negotiated, as I mentioned, Belize was in a state where there was simply no fiscal space, and the government didn't have any room to invest in programs, national programs. And so from those savings from the deal, government was allowed to invest in other programs. But more importantly for us, from our space, was that it had committed to invest approximately $90 million US over a 20-year period for marine conservation. And it also capitalized endowment that would have matured and would then come in as another long-term financing mechanism for marine conservation and responsible blue economic growth. So what the deal resulted in was, we often refer it as three key things. It allowed us to reduce our debt stock, which was very critical at the time. It allowed us to realize savings, not only from the deal, but also from the repayment of now the new blue bonds, that in terms of debt servicing. And it allowed for us to now set up a very critical long-term financing mechanism for marine conservation in Belize, which for us was important. Like a lot of countries who have very ambitious targets for their conservation, climate, and responsible blue economic growth, one of the biggest issues is really financing that. And so the deal for the first time, I would say, allowed Belize to now have a long-term mechanism that is in place, that we know is there, and we know we can continue to invest to realize these very important marine conservation and targeted investment in terms of improving the governance for responsible blue economic growth. In terms of how the deal was the negotiations was primarily spearheaded by the Ministry of Finance. we did have input from technical people. Myself being in the Ministry of Blue Economy at the time, was one of the technocrats that were working on the conservation commitments that were associated with the deal. Because the deal is really a results-based financing mechanism, and so it's meant to deliver on specific milestones and targets. And so the Ministry of Finance really spearheaded the team with both foreign and national advisors, financial advisors, and legal people who, along with the TNC, were able to construct that deal. The specifics with the deal from the financial end, I'll ask Kevin if he can weigh in on that. But in terms of now delivery on the Blue Bond and in terms of delivery of impact, one of the first things that was that two things really. The government of Belize created the Blue Bond and Finance Permanence Unit, which is a unit within the Office of the Prime Minister, and that is my office. And it realized that these targets that are associated with the bonds are very much intergovernmental. It's multi-sectorial, multi-stakeholder, and it requires a very high level of coordination to coordinate the delivery across whole of government, really, and sectors. And I think the experience we've had within government and on the delivery, we are very much totally in compliance with all our obligations to date, both the conservation obligations and also our financial obligations. And the role of this office in coordinating across government, we have seen as being one of the most impactful mechanisms in terms of successful delivery on the Blue Bonds, to be able to coordinate at that high level and to ensure that the Blue Bond, which we always refer to as national policy, because what the Blue Bond contains is a suite of key policy areas that as a country we've decided to move on, that is able to have those policies championed by the Prime Minister himself, and so that allow for better mainstreaming and integration and success in terms of delivery. The other important area I think we did was that there was a creation of the Belize Fund for a Sustainable Future, and that is our National Conservation Fund. And the Belize Fund for a Sustainable Future is a totally independent body. It's not a governmental body. It's a private body. It has a board that is non-government majority. Government does sit on it, but it also has important stakeholders that are within the space that sits on it. And that fund is the mechanism which receives the conservation payments that the government makes through the deal, and oversees the investments and the distribution of grants to ensure that there is a transparent mechanism and to ensure that there is a board which represents inclusivity in terms of the various stakeholders in the space, and also to ensure accountability and that the investments are really being made where they were agreed to be made, which is to deliver on these important targets, one, but also to deliver on other areas in terms of building capacities in communities and sustainable livelihoods and climate areas and other areas in marine conservation. That the Belize Fund really administer grants through two key mechanisms. One of them is referred to as a government strategic allocation, And that allocation is to build capacity within government. At the end of the day, government has a critical role in terms of policy implementation and in terms of actually delivering on these targets. And the other facility is what we refer to as a grant awards program, which is primarily targeting our underground partners, community, private sector, NGO, conservation NGOs, academia, everybody who is on the ground, who forms that ecosystem, that delivery ecosystem, can really access the monies through that fund. So I'll close for a minute, but I'll close by saying that we're very proud of where we are really after just 3 years after the deal was signed in November of 2021. And so far, government has made conservation payments of approximately $10 million US. And we have invested through the Belize Fund for a Sustainable Future approximately $9 million US in terms of delivering on our obligations under that agreement, and also in terms of working with our underground partners in marine conservation, MPA management, livelihoods, activities, research, sustainable fisheries. And we are very proud that we have really reached approximately 36 communities already through the work that we have been doing with the conservation payments and through the Belize Fund. So in a snapshot, that's my general introduction, and I'll leave it there for now for any reactions. And Kevin, feel free to to add on what I started with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beverly, and congratulations, first of all, on what sounds like has been a very successful project that you and your government have embarked upon. In the interest of time, we will take questions at the end of the panel, if that's okay. So we'll go to Monica and Kevin first. Monica, I believe you are here, so hopefully we can have you on camera. I know you've missed a little bit of what's said there by Beverly, but hopefully we can get a different perspective from another government that's already worked on debt swap. So if you could talk to us about how that debt swap was designed and implemented, how it aligns with your national policies, with community participation and cross-government engagement. And finally, if you could tell us a little bit more about the financial and governance framework of Ecuador's debt swap, that would be incredibly useful for all of us to hear more about. And if you could try and keep this intervention to 8 minutes, Monica, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Just make it quickly. My name is Monica Chavez. I've been part of the team that has worked on the Galapagos transaction, and now is working on this follow-up of this transaction. I'm gonna switch quickly to Spanish to make sure that I'm gonna have those 8 minutes. It's easier. I met Beverly just quickly before. We talk a little bit of our experience, so it's nice to meet her again. Well, en el caso de Ecuador, en realidad la historia del canje es completamente diferente a la de Belice, ¿no? Belice se encuentra en un distress financiero, distress económico, mientras que en el caso de Ecuador, la idea de crear una reserva marina en Galápagos empieza en el 2016. Desde el 2016 se quiere hacer esto, pero hay varios temas que se van generando en el camino, entre esos la pandemia del 2020 y nuevas necesidades que van surgiendo post pandemia. Recién a finales del 2022, con el nuevo gobierno, se decide en la COP lanzar el anuncio de la creación de la nueva Reserva Marina Hermandad. Y con esta nueva reserva marina, lo que se hace es, se sale un decreto ejecutivo que le dice al Ministerio de Economía y Finanzas, mire, acabo de crear esta nueva reserva, usted vea cómo financiarla, vea qué hacer, pero tenga en cuenta estos temas. Primero, no tenemos mucha plata y tiene que enviar dinero. Segundo, intente reducir la deuda. Y tercero, el dinero que vaya usted a enviar, que dure por los al menos 20 años que pueda durar, o si es posible, como se dice, forever and ever, amen. Así que el ministerio se vio en una encrucijada, viendo que teníamos que entregar dinero cuando no necesariamente teníamos, pero sobre todo que teníamos que entregar y asegurar que los recursos fluyeran durante varios años. Estuvimos revisando y, como ustedes saben, ya habían salido otras transacciones en el caso de Belice, en el caso de Barbados, en el caso de Seychelles. Así que se decide explorar el tema de hacer un debt swap. Esto fue un trabajo de cerca de 1 año y medio, en el cual en realidad estuvieron involucrados varias instituciones. Los canjes de deuda de manera en general no los puede hacer solo el gobierno o solo el privado. Se necesita una interacción entre varios actores. Entre esos, por ejemplo, dentro del Estado, intervino el Ministerio de Ambiente, evidentemente, el Ministerio de Pesca, porque uno de los objetivos era proteger la nueva reserva de una pesca incidental o de pesca desmesurada, y el Ministerio de Economía y Finanzas, pero por parte del sector privado o de multilaterales también intervinieron. Intervino DFC, intervino IDB, intervinieron también organizaciones como Pew, organizaciones como OFC, aparte de la misma banca de inversión y evidentemente cada uno con su bufete de abogados. Entonces, finalmente, en cuanto al número de personas, es enorme y se necesita el apoyo de todos para poder sacar este tipo de procesos que son complicados. No es nada simple. Em, los desafíos que surgieron en realidad surgieron desde el primer día. El primer día cuando nos llegó este oficio y nos dice, envía dinero por N años y financie todo el gap que tiene ahorita Galápagos. El siguiente desafío, desafío humano. ¿Cómo pones de acuerdo a 100,000 abogados y cada uno que se supone que habla inglés, pero no hablan el mismo idioma? Eso me lo he verificado. ¿Cómo pones también al mismo, hablar en el mismo plano las necesidades que tiene el gobierno, las ideas que tiene también las organizaciones multilaterales? Porque siempre vienen con la idea de vamos a los best practice, vamos a los por aquí, vamos por allá, pero no necesariamente muchos de estos temas se adaptan a la normativa nacional o se adaptan a las necesidades nacionales. El tercer challenge que nosotros tuvimos fue también temas legales. ¿Qué es esto? ¿Cómo lo hacemos? ¿Cómo funciona? Era algo completamente nuevo, pero al mismo tiempo no. En realidad, Ecuador ha hecho canjes de deuda desde finales de los 80. Entonces, desde finales de 80 estaba esto, pero siempre lo habíamos hecho bilateral con un país. Cuando entran 20 personas, cuando entra un privado, cuando entra un multilateral, ¿es esto un canje de deuda? ¿No es un canje de deuda? ¿Qué es esto? Ese fue el siguiente desafío que nos tomó en realidad cerca de 6 meses, solventar dudas legales que teníamos, porque Ecuador tiene una normativa legal bastante restrictiva. Em, por último, están también el tira y afloja constante de los compromisos de conservación. ¿Qué es lo que queremos? ¿Qué es lo que podemos? ¿Qué realmente se puede y qué el Estado puede comprometer durante, en este caso, los 20 años de la transacción? Queríamos indicadores que representen, que reflejen lo que estamos haciendo, evitar esta idea de quote unquote de greenwashing. Queríamos asegurarnos que íbamos a tener una nueva reserva que estuviera funcionando, y eso fueron varios meses de discusiones entre todas las instituciones. Y por último, que parece también sumamente fácil al final, pero en realidad sigue siendo un tema de discusión continua, la creación del fondo de conservación. ¿Cómo va a funcionar el fondo de conservación? ¿Qué entidades van a formar parte del fondo de conservación? ¿Cuánto dinero se va a enviar al fondo de conservación? ¿Es suficiente lo que se está enviando o no? Esas dudas aparecen siempre en el camino y se tienen que ir despejando a manera que uno va avanzando. Yo recuerdo que la transacción se firmó a pocas horas, más bien dicho, a pocas horas solventamos dudas relacionadas con el fondo de conservación de que saliera la transacción al mercado. Entonces, a ese nivel llegan los diferentes desafíos que se van creando. ¿Cómo se pueden ir solventando estos desafíos? Yo creo que pues se necesita un líder en cada una primero de las instituciones. Y eso también se necesita a nivel del sector privado, del área de los multilaterales, un project manager, alguien que esté en contacto con las diferentes instituciones, con las diferentes personas que están ahí. Se necesita también, no necesariamente todas las instituciones tienen que entender todo cómo funciona, porque son deals extremadamente complejos, pero sí necesitas a la persona específica que entienda, por ejemplo, de los compromisos de conservación, de cómo va a funcionar la parte financiera, y es el apoyo de cada uno, de ese knowledge de cada uno que nos permite avanzar. ¿Intervinieron la población o no? Sí, la verdad, como te decía, este fue un proceso que inicia en el 2016 con una iniciativa de la población de Galápagos. Es Galápagos la que dice, quiero hacer una nueva reserva hermandad. Se hacen los trabajos, se hacen los estudios. Para poder hacerlo hubo también una negociación bastante compleja con el sector pesquero. Le ibas a decir al sector pesquero que ya no puede pescar en esa zona. Y eso implica negociaciones que tomaron también varios años. Implica también el deseo de las comunidades, el deseo del país, de que queremos ir no solo hacia una pesca responsable, pero hacia una protección, porque la Reserva Hermandad tiene un área de no-take, y eso tiene implicaciones para este sector pesquero. En cuanto a los otros temas, las otras preguntas que me decías, el impacto que ha tenido el canje, ¿cuáles han sido los temas de éxito? Yo creo que primero los temas de éxito es, para que cualquier canje funcione, se necesita que el gobierno quiera hacer el canje. Yo creo que si no tienes el mandato desde arriba que se quiere hacer el canje, nada va a funcionar. Se necesita también, como te digo, estos project leaders dentro de las instituciones. Si no tienes eso, las ideas se dispersan. Como esta fue una transacción, la de Galápagos, con un componente humano tan grande, tan diverso, que necesitabas de esos project leaders. Necesitas a la comunidad. Sin la comunidad, sin la aceptación del sector pesquero, nunca hubiéramos tenido la nueva reserva hermandad. Y sin eso no hay canje. Se dice que estas son transacciones financieras, pero no es así. Estas son transacciones ambientales y financieras. El componente financiero se logra porque tiene un componente ambiental. Y sin eso no se puede hacer nada. Y eso es algo que hay que entenderlo. Porque tiene beneficios financieros, claro que tiene beneficios financieros, pero es el componente ambiental el que es el trigger de los beneficios financieros. Y así es que hay que verlo. ¿Cuáles son los beneficios que se han generado para el Estado y para las diferentes comunidades, ¿no? El primero es que hemos pasado cerca de 400 millones para conservación durante los 20 años que dura la transacción. Son cerca de 13 millones que se están yendo para proyectos anualmente. El resto se va para un fondo que va a ir generando recursos, de manera que una vez que se acabe el periodo de entrega de los recursos, este fondo pueda sustituir este ingreso y finalmente tengamos un fondo a perpetuidad, que es lo que el mandato inicial que nos entregaron. A nivel fiscal también hay beneficios. Como les decía, también es una transacción financiera y fiscal. Sí hay un debt relief bastante importante en el caso de Ecuador. Cerca de 1.000 millones fueron reducidos de nuestro presupuesto que ya no tendrá que ser destinado para pago de deudas, sino se quedará en el país y podrá ser destinado para otro tipo de recursos. Con esto también están los beneficios que se generan a nivel de creación de nuevos proyectos, hitos de conservación que estamos poniendo. No estamos creando una nueva reserva en papel, que generalmente se habla, sino te estás creando una nueva reserva con hitos de conservación para asegurarte que esto vaya a funcionar. Eso también es algo que en nuestro caso era diferente. Por último, yo creo
Sorry,
que
could we I'm really mindful of getting to questions at
yes.
the end. So
Yes, I'm
just one more minute, please.
just the last exactly. I'm just the
Perfect. Sorry.
last question about I was going to the last question about bueno, la última consulta sobre cómo funcionó la parte financiera. Yo cuando entran a esto les digo que en realidad es muchas instituciones y es extremadamente complejo. Y si es que entramos a esa consulta, a esa pregunta, en realidad vamos a necesitar otra hora para entrar a detallar, porque seguimos revisando la transacción y se sigue viendo bastante compleja. Pero lo que hay que retener, lo que hay que poner en mente es que no es fácil, no son transacciones evidentes, toman tiempo, pero hay un payoff y hay un payoff que es bastante interesante. Lo último que también es importante tomar en cuenta y que creo que nadie lo habla es del aftermath. ¿Qué pasa una vez que acaban con la transacción? Sí hay challenges y hay challenges que el país debe tomar en cuenta. Eso sería todo.
Thank you so much, Monica. And thank you to Beverly and Monica for giving some real examples of these instruments, which adds a lot of detail from last week's presentations from Paul and Jill. Kevin, if I could move over to you, could you tell us a little bit about TNC's technical support in facilitating these deals, both from a financial and non-financial perspective? And sorry, Kevin, if we can keep to 6 or 7 minutes, that would be great. We've got a few speakers to get through.
All right, thanks, Charlie. And thanks, Beverly and Monica. That was interesting. I'll be quick. I'll try to go as fast as possible because a lot of this stuff has already been covered, and I'll just clarify TNC's role in this. It's important to note that two things came out of the first two speakers were, one, Belize was the first to ever do a commercial debt swap like that, working with TNC, and Ecuador did the largest and one of the most recent ones. And that was of the ones that have been done so far, that was the only one that TNC was not involved in, but it was a very similar structure, even the same bank and bankers and credit enhancer. And we were, all those people I've worked with almost all those people. One thing that was interesting about the Ecuador evolution, because there was some big steps made in there, one with IDB coming into work and support with DFC was very interesting. I won't get, as Monica said, we can't get into this too much because it's too much detail. But the other thing was there were TNC on our projects and transactions so far has played a lot of roles, and some of those roles were played by others in the Ecuador one. And then that makes it, one, more sustainable, right? Because then we can have others doing it. And if the private sector can get in and make money off of this, then these things can grow exponentially. But it makes it more complex. And then it also, as Monica probably pointed out, when you have all of these counterparties coming in, it gets a little complex. And then all of those counterparties have to have their own lawyers, which makes it expensive, but also makes it more complex. And it has to be done, right? Because these are sovereign loan agreements, so they have to be done correctly. We're working hard on streamlining all of that. And, my job now, I used to be the financial lead. Now I'm working on leading a group called Greening Sovereign Debt, but we're looking on scaling this and addressing a lot of these problems. So this is very helpful. So what you see with in one of the evolutions that we're because there's only been a few transactions, but we've already made some things better, is that getting more parties, when we did the Belize transaction and project in the beginning, we hired the investment bank. We had a SPV that issued the bonds, and the loans, where the loan was made from the SPV to the country, which is SPV. If you're not familiar with that, it's a very normal financial term. It's just like a kind of a separate company that money passes through, right? So we needed that for tax purposes, and it's very common in the financial world. But because of that, Belize didn't need to hire Credit Suisse, right? We hired Credit Suisse, and Credit Suisse kind of worked through us, and there wasn't a whole lot of interaction between the Ministry of Finance in Belize and the bank. It doesn't have to be that way. We've done some other deals where the countries want to be more involved, but it can be done that way. But it like these things get into the minutia, and it does get a little complicated. Everybody understands the basic structure, so I won't go over it. But basically, we're taking existing debt from a government and refinancing it into better terms. And those better terms create savings, and that savings finances the conservation, right? Behind that, as I think Monica or Beverly, I forget, or maybe both pointed out, the conservation has to be the driving force, because we only get that savings from the credit enhancement from the U.S. government in DFC's case, or the Inter-American Development Bank in Barbados's case, and some in the Ecuador case. But we are working with a whole bunch of credit enhancement providers: African Development Bank, AIIB, Green Climate Fund. There should be a lot more coming along. The World Bank has just put out a paper, so there should be a lot more sources. But the only reason that credit enhancement comes is because of the conservation, right? And it is definitely should be repeated again that if the country does not want to do the conservation, if that's not what's driving this, it's not going to work, right? Everybody's getting very excited about the debt and the IMF and the rating agencies. And I was just at a conference called DebtCon in Paris in June about the debt benefits, and really they should be talking about the conservation financing and the conservation commitment achievement benefits, because otherwise it breaks down. I want to point out that both Belize and Ecuador that you've heard from today were trading at significant discounts, and were on somewhat or significantly distressed level debt problems. So they were trading very cheaply in the market, which is great because that allows for a big reduction in the debt profile. But Gabon and Barbados were not, and they weren't trading at deep discounts. They were simply saying, in Gabon's case, Gabon put all of the money back into conservation, and they just got to extend the tenor. So there's other benefits of the transaction, but they were putting all of their money back into the ocean conservation. Another thing to point out is TNC has so far only done this on purpose in the ocean space, and Pew and Ecuador and everybody involved in that also worked in the ocean space. But we're actively working on forests and climate, as well as continuing in the ocean. So all of that is available. On the, as I mentioned, the risk mitigation comes and makes the whole thing financially worthwhile or available to achievable. But without it, none of this can be done. It takes a lot of credit enhancement. And then that credit enhancement allows us to issue different bonds in the market to finance this. So for those of you who are familiar with credit ratings, Belize was around CA3 on the lower end of the scale, and we issued bonds because of the credit rating at AA2, which is almost to the top. So the difference between there is what creates the savings. And that is why these credit enhancers are coming in, and they're so interested in it. So there is a lot available. People, TNC can help you with this. Others can help you with this, the complexities, but it's usually somebody else that goes to the credit enhancement provider and kind of clarifies all this, the financial structuring. In that case, it's TNC, but in Ecuador's case, there were other people playing the roles of TNC, because TNC also plays the conservation and the financing advisory role. And we're working on getting more coverage for technical assistance for countries that go into this, or countries that are considering going into this, to help. One of the things that we've done at TNC is we've created a toolkit on the history, based on the projects that we've done. We put together a toolkit that runs you through the beginning of consideration all the way to financial close, all the way to post-financial close, which is where the conservation gets going and the cash flows come through. And it goes through every component of it. It's not a do-it-yourself toolkit. It's just to give you a high level of understanding of the process. That is available in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese on our website. And if you can't find it, just send me an email. I do have a QR code, but it's kind of small, so I won't put it up here, but it should be easy to find. Lastly, you wanted to talk about some of the cost benefit analysis of, why do these? There's a lot of criticism that these are too expensive, but there's a lot of confusion as to what goes on because they are so complicated and not always as transparent as, one would hope, but they are, sovereign agreements, and not all of those can be released to the public. Some of them can. We're working on principles of how to best do these that would match with the toolkit, working with several entities on that, but they do get complicated. And you need assistance on that. Like I said, the toolkits would help, and TNC does play that role. And we're happy to talk to you if there are other NGOs that are playing that role, and then some of the private sectors. The cost, if you bring in the private sector players to help advise, will raise the cost. But that, that should be the sustainable way to go forward. And you should have advisors on the financial side for sure on these, because they're new. One thing to think about on the Ministry of Finance not new, right? There's World Bank loans that act the same way, which have kind of like KPIs and commitments that you have to make in environment or education and the like. And the concept of refinancing debt is not new to these ministries of finance, but putting it all together in this rather complicated, commitment, long-lasting thing can be a little daunting. So I would definitely encourage anybody on here to, one, look at the toolkits. It's like a 60-page document that walks you through the whole process, and then reach out to TNC if you need more clarification. You will definitely need more clarification, but we're happy to talk you through it and have follow-up meetings.
Thanks so much, Kevin. And we do have a question specifically asking for that, so we're happy to share links to those toolkits in the outputs from this meeting. Thank you, Monica, Beverly, and Kevin, for your presentations. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next panel, and we can answer any questions together at the end because we have 3 more speakers today. We want to move on to talk about some slightly different instruments and another set of financial tools. So we're going to talk about sustainability-linked bonds and loans now, and we'll be hearing from one government official and a financial expert on how these vehicles are designed and the opportunities that they offer. So the 2 panelists that we have to talk about this topic are Luis Fernando Alves, who is the head of public debt from the National Treasury of Brazil, who will discuss Brazil's recent sovereign sustainable bond issuance. And we have Arend Kulenkamp, who is the lead on sovereign finance at the lead on sovereign finance at the Sustainability-Linked Sovereign Debt Hub, who will tell us about an independent analytical project in this area. So I'd invite you both to open your cameras if possible. And first of all, I think Louise is there. I can't. Yeah, perfect. And first of all, I'd like to invite Louise to tell us what lessons can be learned from Brazil's experience in launching this sovereign sustainable bond framework and issuing Brazil's 2 billion sovereign sustainable bond. Over to you, Louise. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Sorry. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and share insights with you all. I will share our experience with our sustainable bonds issuances. But first, a brief presentation. My name is Luis. I'm the head of the middle office for debt management in Brazil, the area which is responsible for strategic planning of debt. And also, we are quite involved in the development of the framework for sustainable bonds in Brazil. Moving ahead with the slides, please. Last year, we published our first framework for sustainable sovereign issuances in the international market. The development of this framework was supported by the World Bank and also by the IDB. The framework provides guidelines for a use of proceeds structure in the issuances of our bonds rather than sustainability-linked bonds. It is aligned with the major international principles, such as those set by the ICMA, and for this, it underwent a second peer opinion by Sustainalytics. The next slide, please. The slides for me here is not so good. Now, okay. As part of the governance structure for the framework and our sustainable issuances, we established a sustainable sovereign finance committee, recognizing that the sustainability agenda involves various actors and federal ministries. It is composed of 11 members, of which 8 are representatives from line ministries. The Secretary of the National Treasury chairs the committee. The committee is responsible for planning, developing, and monitoring not only the framework, but also all post-issuance reports and other related tasks, which ensures the representation of policies and guarantees engagement and coordination among the various government sectors involved in this agenda. In particular, it's important for the flow of information in order to provide transparency and communication in this framework. Next slide, please. The committee is responsible for identifying and selecting expenditures to be reported for each sustainable bond. And after issuances, it will monitor the budget execution as planned to ensure the allocation of an amount equivalent to the issuance proceeds. In the next slide, please. It is through the committee that will consolidate and publish the post-issuance reports. We are committed to publishing every 12 months an allocation report, which must be externally verified, and an impact report. In fact, we'll publish a single allocation and impact report each year. The first one is already under development and should be published by the end of October this year. Within the report, we will provide a breakdown of allocations for each bond issued. In the next slide, our framework considers a broad range of environmental and social expenditures eligible for the use of proceeds from the sustainable issuances. The idea behind the framework is to have an umbrella for various issuances within a medium-term strategy for Brazil's sustainable bond placements. However, to provide more clarity to investors on which subset of expenditures from the framework will be considered for each issuances, we have introduced a pre-issuance report. The pre-issuance report is an innovation that arose after talks we had with investors during a non-deal roadshow after the launch of the framework last year. This allows us to clearly indicate how much we are expected to allocate to environmental expenditures and how much to social expenditures once we have both in our framework. Within these groups, we specify how much we plan to allocate to each category of expenditures in the framework. As you can see here in the table, for the first issuances, we focus on poverty alleviation and food security expenses in with regard to the social expenditures. For the second issuance, we indicated poverty alleviation and access to basic infrastructure. In the next slide, we have a similar breakdown for environmental categories. For instance, we consider here categories of expenditures related to renewable energy such as solar and wind energy, and clean transportation. These categories involve disbursement from the National Fund of Climate Change, or Fundo Clima, which is operated by the BNDES. In addition, the central government budget also includes expenditures related to the protection of biodiversity and adaptation to climate change, among others. The interval format allows us to combine transparency with some flexibility in allocation across categories. And finally, note that each category is also linked to the SDGs. In the next slides, well, now from the debt management perspective, the National Treasury's sustainable issuances are part of a medium-term strategy for debt in the international market. The external debt strategy, in our case, aims for a more qualitative approach rather than just meeting the Treasury's financing needs. Currently, external debt accounts for just under 5% of the federal public debt in Brazil. So our guidelines focus on establishing strong benchmarks for the sovereign yield curve in hard currency, providing solid reference for corporate issuances in Brazil. Additionally, we aim to diversify and expand our investor base, including through sustainable issuances. So in the next slides, while we may see our yield curve, while in conventional issuances, we typically issue 10 and 30-year benchmarks, sustainable issuances tend to be concentrated in the belly of the curve, right in the green balls in this graph. So we issued 2 sustainable bonds, which represent 7-year benchmarks in our yield curves. In the next slide, and moving towards to the conclusion, I would like to emphasize the sovereign's role in setting benchmarks for corporate sector, especially for medium-sized companies in Brazil. A study conducted by our team prior to the Brazil's first issuances, using IDB data for issuers in Latin America and Caribbean, provided evidence of up to 25% increase in the number of issuances and up to a 60% increase in the financial volume raised by the corporate sector following a sovereign ESG issuances within a 36 months time frame. Well, in the next slide, we have the results of our 2 sustainable bond issuances in the international market. The first was carried out in November last year, and the second took place in June this year. In each, we raised $2 billion, and we consider that both issuances were quite well received by the investors. And finally, in the last slide, it's important to talk about transparency. We have created a dedicated page. In the next slide, please. We have created a dedicated page on our website for sustainable issuances, which includes information on the framework and the committee, as well as a Q&A section and other resources. So I finish here. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Louise. And we can definitely share that link to the website that Louise has just referenced with all attendees here, so that you have access to that, which seems like a great resource. So thank you for sharing that. Secondly, on this panel, can I turn to you, please, Aaron, to talk about the integration of forestry KPIs with public financial management, and the case study that you have organised. If you could please keep this to 8 minutes or less, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Charlie, and greetings to you all. I'd like to share some slides, but I'm blocked from doing that. If you could enable screen sharing. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, while you do that, I'd just like to clarify also the presentation title and the agenda. So the Sustainability Linked Sovereign Debt Hub, of which I am the director, which is a nonprofit platform based in Switzerland. We're working on an independent analytical exercise to model the potential precisely of these types of instruments, nature-linked sovereign financing instruments, to feed through and to uplift the sovereign, so the government's credit profile, and to help advance the sustainable development story. So this is not a case study of an actual live transaction, but rather we are developing an approach that aims to bolster the case for nature-linked financing. And we're testing it out in a number of countries, among them Ghana. So I'm just going to quickly try again to share my screen. Yes. So hopefully you can see that.
That works.
Now.
Thank you, Aaron.
Wonderful. And so we've heard about the challenges from, of course, the issuers to date, and from Kevin. We encounter these on an ongoing basis in our engagements with DMLs all over the world. We have a capacity building program that we call the KPI Accelerator, focused on nature. And we hear a lot about the concerns and pain points that debt management offices in particular face. And oftentimes it is the problem of generating precisely, as we heard from Monica, the challenge of building political will and buy-in from different parts of the government. And that there is sort of a calculus between whether to issue a nature-linked bond or a regular bond. And oftentimes it's difficult for debt managers in our sort of engagements and what we've learned to justify the issuance of these types of bonds. So that's the project that I will be describing now is precisely aimed at tackling that challenge. And very briefly, this is all in service of breaking this vicious cycle that we're all familiar with. It's the escalating impact of climate shocks and nature loss on public finances, which we're seeing in real time in a number of countries. And this is likely to get worse as these costs accumulate in the face of worsening climate change and nature degradation. And that will continuously erode fiscal headspace, incapacitate governments to take the kinds of actions and commit the types of resources they need to build resilience against these shocks. And then, of course, that can then aggravate the situation even further. So, we were established to help break this cycle. And really our solution is to scale up precisely these types of sustainability-linked instruments, including sustainability-linked bonds and loans. And we do this by working with different actors across the ecosystem to try to coordinate actions and come up with solutions. And specifically, we try to look at sort of where we see the biggest bottlenecks and gaps and blind spots. And so just very quickly, abstracting a bit away from the instruments, what we are talking about is really KPI-linked public financial management solutions. So these are basically comprising 4 main building blocks. There's a commitment device. There's a set of targets that an issuer will put forward and formally, contractually commit to. And these progress against those targets then are tracked via key performance indicators that also are sort of embedded within a framework that shows that they are clearly relevant and material to the target. And then there's a set of enhanced reporting protocols that go with that. And these really stress the importance of transparency, traceability, and integrity of the data. And finally, there are a series of financial rewards and penalties that are also built into these mechanisms. And to give an example of precisely a forestry or nature-linked bond that has already been issued to date, you'll probably have heard of the Uruguay Forest Cover Bond that was issued in 2022. I kind of just laid out here the mechanics of the bond. So they take geospatial imagery to determine the extent of native forest cover in the country. And they do this at different observation points over the life of the bond. And then depending on whether native forest cover has increased or decreased, there is a change in the interest rate, a coupon step up in the event that the targets are missed, or a coupon step down in the event that the targets are achieved. So this is a bond that's now currently live. But the reality is that we've seen very few of these bonds. And likewise with debt for nature swaps, there was sort of a flurry of issuances of deals, coinciding with tightening of the global credit conditions around 2022. And then it's been a bit of a drought ever since. The last sort of major transaction was the Uruguay sustainability-linked loan towards the end of last year. So the question that we ask and the problem we're trying to solve is, well, why is that? How can we unlock more of these types of transactions? And really there are a number of different challenges that we're tackling. But as I see it, and going to the very important points that Kevin and the other colleagues, the panelists made, is the problem of political will and incentives. And so if you think about it in terms of a threefold principal agent problem, the way that you can think about it is you have these broad sustainability goals that the executive sets, and then you have the Ministry of Finance or the Debt Management Office, which has a narrower set of objectives and key results, oftentimes around public financial management goals, such as building the yield curve, as we heard from Luis, diversifying the funding base, reducing the borrowing costs. And so there's often a tenuous link between these high-level sustainability goals and the actual mandates and objectives that DMOs have to pursue. And then at the same time, a constant challenge that we hear from DMOs all over the world is that there's sort of a misalignment of incentives between the DMO, who contracts to do these sorts of transactions, and ultimately sort of suffers the consequences if the executing authorities do not implement these transactions. I don't want to overstate how challenging this is, but rather to show that there are ways to overcome these problems. One of them that we're working on and that we're testing out precisely in a number of countries, including Ghana, is what we call the Financial Materiality Assessment Framework. What this seeks to achieve is to draw clear linkages between a sustainability target and its KPIs and the macro fiscal profile of a country that then feeds into tools such as credit rating models and debt sustainability analysis. Again, the objective is to show that countries can achieve both objectives. The debt manager's objective around optimizing debt structure, reducing borrowing costs, but at the same time also achieve the sustainability outcomes that they're looking to pursue. And so this is just a very sort of complex schematic, and I won't go into the details, but hopefully you can sort of see the logic of it. You have sort of high-level KPIs that are embedded within a bond, but there are also sorts of all various dimensions of these that also need to be in consideration. I'll give an example of this now. So Ghana, of course, is a country that has really experienced the doom loop that I described earlier, this nexus between nature, climate, and credit to a severe extent. And here, just to show kind of the story, the growth story and the credit story from one angle, and that is that so the contribution of nature was very significant at one stage and has sort of been supplanted by other major growth drivers. And this is also seen in the export profile. So Ghana, of course, is one of the major producers of cocoa around the world, but that is diminished as other products such as gold, logging, and oil and gas have come online. And these are also major drivers of Ghana's deforestation and problems with the cocoa sector that we're seeing at the moment. So very briefly, just to show how this assessment framework would play out in a country like Ghana. So if you had a forest cover KPI that you could plug into, whether it be a loan or an SLB, you can then sort of look at, well, what are the upstream KPIs that drive deforestation in these countries. And that's a combination of a variety of things, but let's just focus on 4 here: cropland expansion, artisanal mining, logging, cocoa expansions. These all contribute to deforestation. And these also map to the macro fiscal profile. So things like the economic structure, how big the agriculture sector is, how fast the economy is growing because of output from cocoa and so forth, the balance of payments, exports from cocoa that generate FX reserves that then support the currency. So all of these complex dynamics need to be modeled so that we can show that actually preserving standing forest can be credit positive. And then we can also think about a toolkit of different KPI-linked solutions that can be brought in to sort of generate that uplift. So we heard about debt for nature swaps, sustainability-linked bonds. Those, if they are configured in such a way that they take KPIs and the targets that they choose are credit relevant or financially material, will not only provide benefits in the form of coupon step downs, but also sort of broader macro fiscal uplift over the medium term as these targets are achieved. And then I won't go into too many details, but we also have to think about sort of the additional revenue streams that can be brought from this. So if you have a forestry KPI, for instance, you can develop MRV systems and baselines to generate jurisdictional REDD+ credits, for instance. This can represent a financial income for the government as well. So all of these various flows have to be mapped so that at the end you can show these types of instruments are actually part of core credit risk management and debt management of the issuer, and not sort of an ancillary sustainability story. So, we'll be sharing more of the findings as they come out. We're in the middle of doing some heavy modeling to showcase exactly how these macro fiscal transmission channels look and work. And we'll be sharing that in a case study in the near future. But it's delightful to be part of this conversation. And yes, please feel free to reach out at any point if you have questions about this and our other work, and happy to answer some questions now if we have time. And apologies for speaking so quick.
No. We started late, Aaron. It was our fault. And thank you so much for that, Aaron. We can put you in touch and make sure your contact details are clear in the readout of this meeting or webinar, sorry. And I know there are many members online listening who might be interested in a similar type of assessment to what you just demonstrated there. In the interest of time, sorry, I don't think we're going to get to questions today, so please keep putting them in the Q&A, and they can be answered live by the panelists right now, or we can come back offline over email afterwards. Thank you for the illustrations of the Brazilian and Ghanaian and Uruguayan cases there to both our speakers, Louise and Aaron. Finally, we have a presentation from Fei Wang, who is a senior financial officer at the World Bank Group, and we'll round up today's discussion with a recent issuance of the World Bank's Amazon Reforestation Outcome Bond, the largest outcome bond to date that has partnered with private investors and local Brazilian companies. Welcome, Fei. Thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Charlie. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. My name is Fei Wang from World Bank Treasury. Be very delighted to walk through the transactions and, more importantly, the rationale behind us issuing this type of bonds in the market. Perhaps we can go to the next slide. So first, a round of introduction. The World Bank, we as a bond issuer in capital market, we have been there for about 80 years. So we know this market deeply, and we have been reaching out to many investors around the world. We have seen through all these years, obviously not myself, but as an institution, we have seen a transition of sort of attention, not transition away. I mean, the financials are still important, the most important considerations by the bond investors, but more and more ESG, the impact aspects are playing a critical roles in the portfolio compositions and investment decision-making process. not necessarily to the extent that a portfolio manager would give up return for impact, but to the extent that they really are focusing on finding investment opportunities that give them, in addition to the financial returns, but also the impacts. And that's why you've seen the green bonds, different various development in the green bond space, where there's a lot of disclosures from the issuers on their use of proceeds, their overall activities, that give investors a good sense of the broad use of the proceeds, but also at the same time, the investors some of them are moving one step further by asking, can I in a way trace my investment in a particular bond? Is there any direct exposure, direct impact that I can associate with my investment? So that's a sort of a further ask for impact from the investor base. At the same time, these are bond investors that we are dealing with. Obviously, they are mandated to make investment in the bond format. So asking them to make direct project investment that is outside of what they can do. So we see a large asset base managed by these bond investors who look to, who'd love to get impact. At the same time, they're not able to participate in supporting projects. That's on one side of the story. On the other side is the project space where there are certain projects which have to take place with the support from the government or philanthropic sources. But certain projects do have economic revenues. They are, in a way, they could afford to pay back investors with their future sort of project income. But it's a pity that we don't have a financial sort of commercial banking system in a way that allow those projects to raise upfront financing cheaply, relying on fully leveraging their future economic revenue. So that's the other side of the picture, where projects with quite potential for the economic returns, in addition to their environmental benefit, still don't have enough access to upfront financing. So that's a problem that we have seen. That's the reason why we have been issuing these outcome bonds with the intention of connecting these two parts. The portfolio managers, the bond investors, which want to achieve impact, and the project which has the economic potential but needs financing at the same time. So maybe we can move to the next slide. So what are the key things, key features that we feel or we have seen are important to attract the investor base that I mentioned before? Here's the list. I'll go through them. First and foremost, we still issue these bonds in a way that all the issuance proceeds are still kept by us, so that the World Bank use those proceeds for our own development operations. So that's a critical one. Us using the proceeds also means that we can guarantee to pay back investor the full principal back. So that is important, the credit aspect, to attract those conservative bond investors that have been buying our name in the past. Now, how do we make financing available to projects if we are not using the bond issuance proceeds to finance the project? Here is a bit of financial structuring that helps with that. So we issue bond in a way that pays a coupon that is lower than what we ordinarily would pay. Let's say if in the current market conditions, we would pay let's say 4% for just for illustration in a certain bond. In this type of outcome bonds, we would pay a coupon, let's say 1.5 to 2% range, a coupon that is quite below our regular coupon. Now, the part of that coupon that is forgone by the investors then will be invested in the projects. So it's really it's the coupons that are forgone by the investors. Those serve the purpose of project investment. Now we have a certain way of front loading those forgone coupons, whether it's 2%, 2.5% per year throughout the life of the bond. We have a way of sort of upfronting them, making them available to the project in the earlier years without the project has to wait every year for the 2%-ish. So that's one thing I want to clarify. Now, that means that the investors in those transactions are having, first and foremost, a full principal protection from us. They are having a certain minimum coupon paid by us, or minimum yield that is IBRD risk. As part of the coupons are forgone and go to the projects, there are certain project risk to the bond investors, because we have structured the bond in such a way that these projects, they will share their future revenues with the investors in return, or as a compensation for investor to give up a portion of our regular coupons. So if the projects or the underlying project is not performing as expected, the future revenue is lower than expected, obviously that's where the investor would suffer, but they would only suffer to the extent that this part of the coupons are not, up to their initial expectation. The guaranteed minimum coupon from us, the principals are still there. So we're talking about a risk, but also a very well-controlled risk, or mitigated risk. If the projects are performing up to their original design, then the overall yield to the investors is going to be a little higher than the yield with our regular fixed rate bond. So that also means that there's a bit of reward to investors for the risk that they have taken, to reward them for using part of the coupons they are entitled to receive to provide a upfront financing to the project. So it's a very much market-based a model where investors are in for controlled risk. They're looking for a return, a reward, versus our vanilla bond, versus a donation. So that's important aspect, because the donation space is there. I mean, it should continue, but we don't want to get into that space, but we want to rather leverage the interest from the bond investors, somehow creating a channel for those investors who's managing a large amount of money to start finding a way to make investment into the projects. So that's the overall consideration of our outcome bonds. And we have done that quite a few times in the past few years, and we certainly continue to look for other projects to bring them to market. We can go to the next slide, where I can very specifically talk about the Amazon reforestation linked bond that we just issued about a couple of weeks ago. So as Charlie mentioned, the largest size ever, $225 million. And the structure is, as I described, 100% principal protection. We offer investor a minimum yield of 1.745% per annum. That is the part of the coupon that is guaranteed by us. Now, on top of that, the bond enabled about 36 million of financing available for a organization called Mambach. They are a Brazilian firm set up to do reforestation in Brazil. What their plan is to acquire deforested land and obviously convert them to forest. They have a very thorough plan of the species they will plant, and more importantly, the project is expected to generate a large amount of carbon credit. Part of that have already been purchased in an offtake agreement with Microsoft. So there is already a well-established economic revenue stream of the project. There's a volume, there's a price agreed, so the investors are not taking carbon credit price risk. It's really about the project risk, whether Mambach as an entity is able to implement a project in full scale. HSBC was the lead manager working closely to help with us on the financial structuring, investor outreach. The bond was placed with, I would say, more than 10 institutional investors in the Americas, in Europe mostly. So it was very well received. And we actually had oversubscription, so we have to sort of allocate the bond among the investors as well. So it is one example of our outcome bonds, but it is a model that we think will be applicable to many projects. It doesn't have to be reforestation project, although I know that's the topic today, but any project that has the development impact and also has future revenue source that are suitable in a way to be packaged in such a bond for investors. So that's all I want to share today. I know it's a short period of time. It's a lot of information, and also there's even more details which I won't be able to go through within the time frame, but certainly welcome questions and happy to address them either, within the schedule.
Thank you so much, Faye, and thank you to all of our speakers today. The plan was to do an open Q&A, but we are already over time, and I can see that people are starting to drop off to other meetings. So can I encourage, we will share these questions with panelists offline, and if you could answer anything that's relevant to your presentations, we can include that with the readout of the meeting afterwards. And if anyone listening wants to ask a specific question, please do send that to the Secretariat. So Silvana, Vittoria, or the Secretariat email address, and we will make sure that those questions are answered by the panelists if they're willing to put in a little bit more time. So because they've already given us so much. So thank you everyone for today. We hope that was really enlightening. We hope you've enjoyed the 2 webinars last week and this week, and we look forward to taking forward this discussion in the coming months at New York Climate Week, CBD COP, and COP29. If you have any questions or follow-ups, please do contact the Secretariat, and we will do our best to facilitate connections where needed. Thank you.